Learning and development managers, it's time to crank it up a notch. It's time to be a leader, prove your value, maybe even save your job. Are things that bad? Or is there an opportunity in turning dull, boring, lifeless training into something that is quite special and take your career to a whole new level? Here to talk to me about this today is Michael Hanley. Mike, thank you for joining me on scottcundill.com.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you, and I look forward to this.
Excellent. So let's begin. Opportunity or crisis for the learning and development managers?
Well, out of crisis always comes opportunity. So although I've spoken to quite a few people that are leaders in the space, that are working for big corporates, they're going through things like having to redo their interviews and things like that. So it is a bit scary at the moment. But out of every crisis comes good opportunity. So it's really how you tackle it, your approach, and as you said, boring content really doesn't make anything memorable or sticky. It doesn't do anything for the learners. It doesn't do anything for making an impact to the bottom line of the business. So the opportunity you really need to leverage around some of the analytics, some of the approaches, looking for a little bit more cost-effective approaches, becoming a little bit more creative with these budgets that have suddenly been cut. So huge amount of opportunity. It is frightening, but it's also the way you tackle it and what you can do to be a leader in the space.
Okay, let's talk about that. So as an L&D manager, it's not just a case of like doing some training and going cool, thumbs up, getting some basic analytics. That used to work in the past. But now you're saying you as a learning and development manager need to start understanding what's happening in the industry. Where is it going? Be progressive. Take the bull by the horns and say, I'm going to make this work. So where should they start? Should they start by becoming more au fait with some of the measurement and analytic techniques? Should they become and study more into new kinds of learning and development techniques or technologies? Where should they start to develop themselves further?
Well, to me, there's two practical approaches to this. The L&D budgets are not the only budgets that are being cut. Budgets are getting cut across the different business units. And I think what's really essential for L&D is to really align themselves to business strategy. And, equip people is one thing, but also to analyze where those knowledge gaps are. So if you are kind of on the hiring, firing process now, and you're looking to follow a few employees, where L&D can step up is actually identify who are the employees that have big skills gaps. Those are the guys that should be going, or these are the guys that we need to train up. That's one aspect of it. So then you're actually adding real relevance to the bottom line of the business strategy.
Wow.
Where I think, also it can relate to from an analytical standpoint, is aligning. Often I see a big gap between L&D. It's a tick box, it's a check box, it's just something that they're doing, but it's not really adding value. It's not enhancing employees' abilities to actually perform really well. So it's analyzing those gaps, where those skill shortages, can we employ some people internally and get them trained up so that they can perform better? Or can we actually analyze where those job performances are lacking, and those are the guys to get rid of first? Because if you look at business units across, they're all getting their budget slacked, and there's a lot of people losing jobs at the moment. So that information is quite critical. Secondly, we also have a completely new normal. So guys are starting to have, they've been working at home. There's a completely new process around managing teams and around how the business is actually controlling performance in those metrics and where those KPIs come into play. So it's also around upskilling in that department. Suddenly there's real risk around cybersecurity from home. So there's lots of content opportunities to really provide valuable insight and skills to the business. So, equipping people to set up networks securely at home, teach them how to do that, managing their own teams. Maybe it's a team leader and they've suddenly had to, change their whole parameter of how they work. Usually they come into an office and have a bit of a huddle in the morning and go on with their days. Now suddenly, it's taking place on Zooms. So, what's best practice on that? So there's a huge expanse of opportunity, I feel. It's not all doom and gloom.
Well, that's, I think, the key. And the L&D managers listening to this need to look at this as an opportunity, because you might be feeling at the moment as if maybe my job's next. But instead, what we're saying is, hang on a second, you've got a huge opportunity. And some of it's not cool, but has to be realized. And that is, you need to identify the skill sets that are problematic, and perhaps be part of the retrenchment process, which is never a nice thing. And as a leader, you need to step up and how to manage that within yourself as well. But there's huge opportunity. And again, Michael, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is you can upskill yourself and not just become important to the organization, but absolutely critical, because there is a new normal. You need to create these best practices approach on how to work remotely. You need to look at those skill gaps which are lacking and turn your current employees who are staying into super employees. How? So Michael, tell us about the solutions around this. Like what do you do? Is it technology? Is it training? Is it both? What is an L&D manager to do to get their skills to that level to make themselves critical to that organization?
Well, I think one thing there, leaders do need to make tough decisions. In terms of technologies and the approach, take a step back, look at the overarching ecosystem. I'm sure beforehand you might have been doing a bit of blended learning, maybe some online, maybe some in the classroom. Maybe a lot of your training was about compliance and ticking the boxes. But now you need to critically analyze what is going to make an impact, what's actually going to make a difference here. And I need to look at the delivery mechanisms. Now I can't actually host classroom-based training. I have to do it online. What are the tools I have available? Maybe I've got Microsoft Teams and Zoom. Are those actually the right tools? Do they give me the right metrics and analytics to prove my worth to the various stakeholders? Can you go back at the end of the month and say, well, actually, these are the areas where I've noticed knowledge gaps, and these are the steps we need to take to improve them. So we need this training intervention done to upskill our guys. They're having real challenges around just general meetings in the workplace via Zoom. People are struggling with their backgrounds. They've got cats running around. Maybe there needs to be some practice around, what's formal and what's informal. And if you're client facing, for instance, in sales, you suddenly got to be, not in the same room. How do you actually leverage now into that? So lots of components to look at. Some companies that we speak to obviously do have some of that in place, but importantly for me is to make sure it's making a real impact. And the only real way you can check that out is through some sort of metrics in terms of analytics, results, and how does it actually correlate to some of the other indicators within business units, some of the KPIs, KPAs. So, looking at sales, if it's about making X amount of calls or this many Zoom meetings, how does that correlate to their performance on training? Do they know the products well enough? Do they know the processes well enough? If you're doing account management, those sorts of things, how does the customer success play a part of this? How does the whole ecosystem of your entire business ecosystem look? And where do the gaps come in when it comes to training? It might come right up front, off the bat, through onboarding. Incredibly difficult to onboard people because you're not really saying hi and meeting them in the office. You might be onboarding someone that's on the other side of the world, but you have nothing, no framework in place. So how do you take that step? I mean, there's loads of routes to look at, but I think importantly, you always have to consider the centricity around the learners. You got to make it learner-centric, because at the end of the day, they're the one that you're equipping. They're the ones you want to keep engaged. And you want to make sure that engagement directly correlates to performance and business impact. Otherwise, you're not being a leader. You're not really stepping up to the plate.
Sure. That's really good, Mike. And it's encouraging, especially in a time of a lot of despondency. It's also encouraging because now really is the time. And one thing I do not think that is going to change. I know you say that budgets are being cut, but training itself will never be cut. It can't be, because this is what's so important. It's about analyzing the right training to the right people at the right time and making sure that those core people are elevating themselves in performance. And you as an L&D manager need to be one of those people. So, Michael, you're very positive, and I can see you really understand the industry well. Tell me about you. I mean, how do you help organizations achieve these high performance metrics?
So I've been in the industry for about 10 years, and I've worked with a number of well-known brands, both locally and abroad. Just to drop a few names there, people like Alan Gray, the Emirates National Oil Company, Discovery. So some really credible blue chip clients. It's not an easy thing to get into those clients. You do have to kind of know what's going on. And I've got a good understanding of the didactics around learning strategies and how that can be supported by technology. I've got a good understanding of the trends around learning and development. So it's a real big passion of mine, which allows me to keep the lens on all things L&D. You know, it's something that I research daily. I consume the information right and where it drops in the right spot. So it's something that I'm sponging up daily. And because we get to deal with such a diverse client profile in so many different sectors and industries, I get to pinpoint pain areas, and they're very common regardless of the industry. You know, you might have a mining client that deals in SHEC, health and safety, and then you might have a financial client that deals with money laundering and, you know, FACE and FICA courses and things like that, where it's compliance. Both are compliance driven and they both have the same challenges. It's always a deep administrative burden for the L&D team. So the ways we look to help them out is to diminish that administrative burden, look at ways to automate some of that so they can focus primarily on the things that are important, and that's the learners. You have to be learner centric. You've got to equip the employees and the learners that are consuming the content. Where we also see deep failures is around that engagement. I always say where boredom wins, learning fails. So content, typically what we find is, you know, it's text driven, hell of a boring. Learners find it a bit of a chore to log in. You know, they often get the stick before they get the carrot, if you know what I mean. So changing that mindset, looking at it from a learner-centric perspective, almost looking at your organization to becoming a culture of learning. You know, inspire that culture is part of what we help with, that change management. So, you know, technology and content is one thing, but it's really the merge of that and looking at it from a holistic point of view as to what really is pertinent, what real impact do you need, and how do we drive those goals. And that's sort of where we found success because, you know, we relate different experiences from different industries. We offer really sound technology that's award-winning. So, you know, we do automations and integrations. For instance, something as simple as a job title being correlated directly to a curriculum. So, you know, you don't have to do those sorts of things manually. If the guy goes into the payroll as a marketing manager, boom, there's a curriculum for that profile off the bat automatically. So some of those administrative burdens really help to spend more time on making the content a little bit more engaging and interactive.
Okay. Mike, if I am a L&D manager and I need to talk to you right now, which I'm sure I would, where can I get hold of you?
Where? You can get hold of me. We've got a website, which is www.newleaftech.co.za. We are across all socials, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and there's contact information there too. You can also get hold of me directly. My email is mike@newleaftech.co.za.
Mike Hanley, thank you so much for joining me on scottcundill.com.
Thank you for having me, Scott. It's been good to chat.